Hello. So I'm a Mega Man fan. I've been a fan ever since his first appearance on the Nintendo Entertainment System. This is my OG childhood copy here. Funny to think I was sold purely on this game itself just by the box art alone. Whenever discussion is brought up on the original NES Mega Man, the conversation almost always leads to its notorious US cover artwork. The series followed the adventures of the heroic robot Mega Man, or Rockman depending on your region, originally created as a lab assistant by brilliant scientist Dr. Thomas Light, but volunteers to be converted into the super fighting robot Mega Man. Mega Man fights for peace and justice and all that jazz, and to defend the world from the mad scientist Dr. Wily.
Dr. Wily.
It's very easy to understand gameplay. You jump, you shoot. I suppose the original Mega Man is a little rough around the edges now, but the many sequels, would improve and refine upon the gameplay. It's simple, timeless fun. What set the series apart at the time was being able to choose which level you could tackle first. After defeating one of the many robot masters, you could claim their powers for your own. It was a pretty unique idea back then. Each boss had a certain weakness to another robot master's weapon, so a part of the fun was trying to figure out what their respective robot master's weakness would be. Defeat all 8 robot masters, or just 6 in the original, and you'd have to face a final gauntlet of stages, including a rematch against the game's robot masters, and a final battle against Dr. Wily himself. And sometimes I can't help but wonder why I like these games so much. I find them pretty difficult. There's been so many of these Mega Man games now, I have tried my best to keep up with all of them, but back then the only Mega Man games I had access to were that first game on the NES and the Game Boy titles. These were the defining Mega Man games of my childhood, simply titled Mega Man Dr. Wily's Revenge, Mega Man 2, 3, 4 and 5 to add to the confusion. They probably should have just stuck with the Japanese title of Mega Man World. Nearly every one of the Game Boy games were like a remix of the NES titles, reusing the same music, robot masters and level themes, but included brand new stage design and a couple of unique characters of their own. With all 5 games being re-released on a Nintendo Switch Online app, I couldn't help but replay my old cartridges again, and thought it might be fun to talk about them. It's been quite a long time since I played them. Classic Mega Man for me wasn't his iconic blue, but that ugly yet kind of charming pea soup green of the Game Boy screen. So I hope you enjoy just a little look back at Mega Man on Game Boy. So we begin with Dr. Wily's Revenge, and much like the original NES Mega Man, a unique cover artwork for the European release. At the time, it did feel pretty amazing having a portable edition of Mega Man in your hands, even if it was heavily scaled back. Remixing content from both Mega Man 1 and 2, but I did always think of it as an abbreviated portable edition of Mega Man 1, opening with only 4 robot masters directly lifted from Mega Man 1 before moving on to the final Wily stages. Elecman is thankfully much easier to deal with here compared to his difficult encounter in the console version. It's actually Cutman and his stage which feels surprisingly difficult. There is no traditional Robot Master rematch here, but instead you'll face an additional 4 bosses from Mega Man 2. It was quite a fun surprise at the time. We're also introduced to an entirely new character, Enka, the first of the Mega Man killers. He is a little tricky to deal with. You'll need to let him absorb your buster shots to deal damage, but after dealing with Enka you'll gain the Mirror Buster, which reflects enemy bullets back at them, one of my favourite Mega Man weapons actually. Following his battle is a pretty difficult final stage with so few checkpoints in between, and then a tough final battle against Dr. Wily himself. This last stretch is where I found the game really difficult to complete as a youngster. It took me quite a long time to beat it. Still, it was very rewarding seeing those credits at last, and I love the cute little cast roll of the game's characters, accompanied by this incredibly charming music. Hearing it again is very strangely evocative from my childhood actually. Dr. Wily's Revenge is the shortest of the games here, but it also feels like it could be the most difficult. A little rough around the edges perhaps, but oh so charming, and a promising start for Mega Man's Game Boy career. Just mere months after the release of Dr. Wily's Revenge, a Game Boy sequel would follow. Mega Man 2 is the only installment of the 5 Game Boy titles to be developed by a different company, and it definitely feels a little different. The graphics can look a little off. The Dr. Wily sprite, for example, looks so tiny compared to Mega Man. Even Kenji Inafune, one of the original character designers and producers for the Mega Man series, has often expressed his disappointment with this particular title. Game Boy Mega Man 2 is a remix of parts 2 and 3. Mega Man now retains the slide ability lifted from Mega Man 3, and his robotic dog sidekick Rush makes his first Game Boy appearance. Rush is just as hilariously overpowered as he was in Mega Man 3. Couple that with the immensely overpowered Metal Blade from Mega Man 2 and you'll feel unstoppable. There are 8 stages here with a Robot Master included, though only 4 of them are accessible to begin with. The remaining levels and bosses are located within Dr. Wily's fortress itself. After completing this next round of stages, Mega Man then teleports to a final level within another Wily fortress, followed by a battle against the Doctor himself. There is no boss rematch room in this game, but all of the Mega Man Game Boy titles would follow a very similar setup of being divided into 2 halves. Whereas Dr. Wily's Revenge at least offered a smattering of new content, very little here actually feels new. At least one new feature here is the soundtrack itself. It's all brand new. Everything just sounds a bit too high-pitched and screechy though. I do think the compositions are quite good, with the soundtrack going for a more somber atmospheric vibe. The brand new villain this time is Quint, an evil reprogrammed Mega Man from a distant future. Yeah, there's a bit of a time travel theme going on in this game, although you wouldn't really notice it unless you read the manual or the back of the box. Much like the rest of the game, Quint is pretty easy. His special weapon is useless, but I do get a kick out of seeing Mega Man ride a giant pogo stick. I'd suppose Mega Man 2 is the weakest of the 5 games here, but I am still quite fond of it. A good beginner title for myself back then, and even playing it now, I think it's okay. Maybe just turn the volume down a little bit. Now in my opinion, this is where the Game Boy Mega Man titles start to get really good. The graphics in particular look great. I think I even kind of prefer how Gemini Man stage looks on the Game Boy. Mega Man 3 on the Game Boy is a remix of 3 and 4, with Mega Man now having access to the slide, Rush the Dog and the charge shot. Sadly, Rush isn't quite as versatile this time. The gameplay still follows the same setup of a first and second half. Unfortunately, the second half is where the difficulty in Mega Man 3 can become a little bit obnoxious. The Dustman stage in particular is really long and difficult. And it's here where you start to realise that perhaps the sprite work is just a bit too big for a Game Boy screen. I can't say any of these special weapons really stood out to me overall. I was content with just using the Mega Buster and the charge shot. The Mega Man killer this time round is Punk Man, and surely the most difficult of them all. His special weapon, the Screw Crusher, isn't terribly useful, but you won't need it for the final boss encounter. After dealing with Punk, the final stage begins. There's still no boss rematch room, but the level itself is a decent challenge, and the main theme here is one of my favourite pieces of Game Boy music. A surprisingly easy final battle against Dr. Wily. Just stand here and shoot, and throw the Screw Crusher into him on the second round. And that's a wrap on Mega Man 3. A few frustrating difficulty spikes aside, I really enjoyed going through Mega Man 3 again. It definitely felt as though the Game Boy Mega Man games were slowly getting closer to matching the same quality as the NES titles. An impressive animated cutscene opens Mega Man 4. Quite a few cutscenes in this game actually. I wouldn't expect too much story, but it did give the game some much needed personality. Mega Man retains all of his previous abilities and joined by his mechanical bird pal Beat, if you can find those 4 special letters. Even Mega Man's mysterious brother Proto Man shows up as a support role, marking his first appearance in the Game Boy titles. It is still the same old gameplay you're surely familiar with by now, although I'm not really a fan of the recoil from a fully powered up Buster Shot. Mega Man 4 is a remix of parts 4 and 5, and while it does reuse stage themes again, I think the level design is quite interesting and it does a fair amount to separate itself from the NES titles. The game even introduces a shop system, and the power chips you collect on your journey can be spent on useful items. There is a fairly decent selection of weapons this time round, and I think the ring boomerang is easily my favourite. The Mega Man killer of this game is Belayed. Found him a little bit tricky to jump over. You'll face him twice in your adventure, and after defeating him in his second encounter, you are awarded the Belayed Cracker. Blade even decides to undergo a little character development at the very end, sacrificing himself to save Mega Man from an exploding spaceship. Some pretty tough final stages, and we even finally have a boss rematch room against all 8 Robot Masters. Even the final encounter with Dr. Wily himself is quite challenging. But I do think overall the difficulty is a little bit more fair compared to Part 3. Mega Man 4 does still borrow content, but I think it does enough to really stand out as its own thing. This is actually one of my favourite Mega Man games from my childhood. Oh, and one little interesting secret worth mentioning. Get 4 game overs in a stage and Dr. Light will pity you I guess and upgrade Mega Man with a more powerful Mega Buster. Whereas the previous 4 Mega Man titles felt, well, let's say good enough for a portable Mega Man at the time. It's Part 5 which really did feel on par with the NES editions. The game features a little bit more story this time round. World peace is shattered by the arrival of mysterious extraterrestrial invaders, the Star Droids, led by their fearsome leader, Terra. This new villain easily defeats our hero at the start of the game, prompting Dr. Light to upgrade Mega Man with a brand new weapon, the Mega Arm. When fully charged, it detaches from Mega Man, strikes your foe and reattaches. The shop and power chips are back again, and you can purchase items or upgrades for your new Mega Arm. You still retain all of your previous abilities, but replacing Beat is a brand new ally, Tango the Cat. And while things still play out the same, Mega Man 5 isn't a remix, but an entirely brand new Mega Man game. 8 unique Robot Masters named after different planets of the solar system, and even the new music is pretty good. An unusual selection of extra weapons this time round too, some of which are required for uncovering secret items. When you finally go up against the fearsome Terra, he is a surprisingly easy fight. You'll gain the Spark Chaser upon his defeat, and if you have found the special item from those hidden crystals, this is easily the best weapon in the game. In a not so surprising reveal, it turns out Dr. Wily is behind this Star Droid attack, and Mega Man flies off to the final battle. I did always find the last stage to feel a little bit boring, to be honest, but there was the fun surprise of a rematch against all 4 of the original Game Boy Mega Man killers. There's another boss rematch room again, followed by a final battle against Dr. Wily. But he isn't the true final boss. The mad scientist unleashes the ancient robot Sunstar, who immediately turns against him and then sets his sights on Mega Man. It's a challenging final encounter, and I seem to be doing really badly. I think I'm a bit tired of playing Mega Man games non-stop at this point. After his defeat, Mega Man, being the good-natured robot that he is, tries to save Sunstar but cannot prevent his fusion reactor from going critical and exploding. A little cheesy perhaps, but this is the kind of simple plot I could really appreciate in a Mega Man game back then. I think I'll parrot the popular opinion here and say that Mega Man 5 is undoubtedly the best of the Game Boy titles. It's easily on par with the best of the series. I think Mega Man 3 and 4 are still my personal favourites though. I didn't actually play Mega Man 5 on my Game Boy back then, but instead the Super Nintendo via the Super Game Boy. A select few Game Boy titles featured special graphical enhancements, Mega Man 5 included. I think these games look great with a little bit of colour added to them. In the early 2000s, Capcom were working on an official Game Boy collection for the Game Boy Advance. I remember being really excited for this release, but sadly it just wasn't meant to be, and quietly cancelled sometime in 2004. Fortunately, there are some dedicated fans out there who have provided us with these fantastic ROM hacks. Mega Man World 2 Deluxe in particular received quite the upgrade. There's the option to switch to an enhanced soundtrack, and even the graphics have been given a little boost. I've never been the biggest fan of these colour hacks of old Game Boy games. They almost never quite match how you imagined them in your childhood, but even I have to admit these really do look exceptionally good. I think this might actually be the definitive way to play these games. I thought I could end my little Mega Man Game Boy marathon with Mega Man Xtreme 1 and 2 for the Game Boy Color. These two games are very similar to the Game Boy Mega Man series in how they remix existing content. All of the music, graphics and characters are directly lifted from the first 3 Mega Man X titles, only downscaled to the Game Boy Color. Xtreme 1 and 2 feature a lot more cutscenes and storytelling, and if I remember my Mega Man X lore correctly, X6 even directly references Xtreme 2. Both titles still retain that faster gameplay of the Super Nintendo games, with our main hero X able to pull off his signature forward dash move, the wall kick, and in the sequel the mid-air dash from X2 and 3. Even Zero is fully playable in the sequel. Xtreme 1 and 2 do suffer from the limitations of the hardware itself. With the lack of extra buttons on the Game Boy compared to a Super Nintendo controller, you are only able to double tap the D-pad to dash. To compensate for this, you do at least automatically dash after performing a wall kick, and you can even change the dash to the start or select button. Actually, that feels even worse, don't do this. Both games seem to really suffer from screen crunch. Some of these bosses feel huge and give you very little room to breathe. I used to absolutely adore Xtreme 1 and 2. Revisiting them again now, I think I still prefer playing Mega Man 1 to 5 on the Game Boy. Sadly, neither of these games are available on the Nintendo Switch app for now, but they were available on the 3DS eShop back then, so I've no doubt they'll show up eventually. And, well, that's really about it. Mega Man on Game Boy. A big part of my childhood, and I do hope we'll see another Mega Man soon. I kinda miss him. Did you play the Mega Man Game Boy games at the time of their release, or did you play them for the first time on the Nintendo Switch app? I think they're still pretty good. If you made it this far into the video, this is where I say thanks ever so much for watching, and I hope I catch you all again next time. Until then, take care.